Well, hello, welcome to Skywarn Recognition Day 2021. I've got Roger Parsons with me, amateur radio operator and ARRL representative. And Roger, you're going to have to tell me about everything that you're involved in there with ARRL. It's hard for me to say all those acronyms all at once, but I'm Warning Coordination Meteorologist John DeBlock at the National Weather Service in Birmingham. And we've got a little bit of a conversation that I'd like to have with Roger about amateur radio and storm spotting. So, Roger, you were telling me how you kind of found us, and why don't you give me a little bit of story about your background and how you came to be a storm spotter and involved with the National Weather Service?
Well, it started several years ago. I was lived through Katrina a couple of times. I actually was in South Florida when it came across as a Category 1, getting my daughter started in college, and then went to Mobile where I lived and took the full brunt of it. Didn't have radios back then. Cell phones wasn't working. Everything. Few years later, I wound up moving back to Birmingham and got my license about 10 years ago. And one of the first events I went to was a Hamfest in Montgomery, where you and another amateur operator, a guy by the name of Ronnie King, were there representing the National Weather Service.
Mm-hmm.
And over your shoulder there is a tornado machine that you had set up there, and kind of was fascinated about it and how they worked, and got to talking about you to Ronnie and you about it, and come to find out this was on a Saturday. On a Tuesday night was the next alert meeting, and alert is the Alabama Emergency Response Team, and it's a group of amateur radios that only support the National Weather Service in Birmingham, and they have a network of controllers out there. And came to the meeting that night, sat down and listened to what was going on, asked a few questions, and decided to join that night. And literally, that was 9 years ago. And it was the first organization I actually joined as a ham operator.
Wow, so in 10 years, you've gone from kind of next to nothing to being a part of a number of organizations. That's pretty awesome. Tell me about ARRL and what your role is
The,
there and how that fits in with amateur radio.
the ARRL is the American Radio Relay League. It was formed a little over 100 years ago as amateur radio, or also known as ham radio. Uh, was in its infancy. It was literally being born at that time, and they set up a series of stations and stuff. And as the amateur radio grew in popularity, it wound up being spread across the world. A couple of times after World War One, we had a large increase in operators, and then during World War II, they shut us down because there was concern of spies using it. After World War II, they realized that there was a lot of advantages to having all of these amateur operators out there, and they started setting up clubs. People started joining it. They got a lot of surplus equipment from the military and were using it. A lot of the radio operators from the military started propagating out and spreading out the radio sport. As we evolved through the decades since World War II, there was the civil defense was the forerunner of current day federal emergency management, or FEMA, and in the state level, it became the emergency management agency at each state. And again, we have built a network, both national and statewide, of amateur radio operators. We have a structure. It's called ARRL, or Amateur Radio Emergency Services, that we provide to any served agency. And that would be the National Weather Service, Emergency Management Association. We also support volunteer organizations like Red Cross. Salvation Army has their own group that they set up that are amateurs that come and join them. And they, again, we have a structure around that puts a person or an emergency coordinator in every county in the state. We have district emergency coordinators that cover several counties, and those counties are broken up to match the state's emergency management districts. And then at the state level, we have a section emergency coordinator who the district emergency coordinator reports to. And then above that would be the top person in the state, the section manager. 5 years ago, and as a matter of fact, right before 5 years ago, a few years back, Ronnie King and I were at the National Weather Service on the second round of what we were thinking were going to be Snowmageddon, uh, where everybody got iced in. We had kids in school frozen in, couldn't get out, people couldn't get home. There were thousands of people stranded when we had pretty much started out as an ice storm, snowstorm, whatever, and everything was shut down in central Alabama. A couple of months or a couple of weeks later, a few weeks later, I think that was early February, we were expecting another possible Snowmageddon, and Ronnie King made the arrangements to come operate the amateur radio station at the National Weather Service right beside y'all's forecasters. And we just, instead of trying to bring people in and out during the snow, didn't know what it was. Ronnie had made, and I had made agreements with you and the other operators that we were just going to stay. We came and planned on staying 24 to 36 hours. Luckily, it was not as bad. But during that event, at the end of that event, everybody was sent home, and we contacted the Jefferson County Emergency Management Center, the Emergency Operations Center, and a radio operator by the name of Jay Van Martin was the operator, the emergency coordinator for Jefferson County. He and Ronnie exchanged some communications, and then he was going to stay on station at Jefferson County while Ronnie and I drove from Shelby County into our homes in Jefferson County. I had no idea who this gentleman was. Eventually, I found out he was the emergency coordinator, and through the rest of the story is a couple of years later, he ran for the section manager office. It's an elected position, and he asked me to serve as one of his district emergency coordinators and as an assistant section manager. That was roughly 5 years ago, this coming January or next month. Back during the summer, J-Van decided that after 5 years, he needed to step aside, and he asked me to run for section manager because he and I had a lot of the same philosophies, wanted to see the same initiatives take place in amateur radio, and I ran for that position. Turns out in September, I found out I was the only candidate, and as a result, I was
you got the job.
A lot of the people have decided that they've been doing this long enough, they want to step aside and let somebody else come in. So I've been spending the last several weeks recruiting replacement volunteers to serve in the ARRL's Amateur Emergency Radio Service, or ARRES, group across the state. But
well, that's quite a journey. In 10 years, you've come a long way there in the organization. Well, let me ask you a little. So does every amateur radio operator need to be are they required to be a storm spotter? And is every storm spotter required to be an amateur radio operator?
No, we have a lot of amateur radios, and again, there's approximately 13,000 license holder in the state of Alabama. Of that, there are probably only about 250 that are Skywarn operators that go through the National Weather Service Skywarn training that is online, and also taught through webinars by the different weather systems, weather service offices throughout the state. Your team has put that on, and I really enjoy going through those training classes with your forecasters. And there are a lot of information, teaches you a lot about what the Weather Service considers severe storms, uh, thunderstorms versus a severe storm, what needs to be reported, what doesn't need to be reported, how to look for stuff, and how to watch the weather and see how it increasingly gets more dramatic as a storm develops. And no, there's not a requirement for Skywarn people to be amateur operators. Again, there's significantly more Skywarn operators out there that are not amateur radio operators, and they use either Twitter, Facebook, one of the other social media platforms to send that information in there. And one of the things that pre-COVID, we actually operated the stations from right beside your operator or beside your forecasters. And as a matter of fact, we sat beside the social media person as they're sitting there with 4 or 5 displays running with all of the social media stuff coming in, and we're picking up the stuff. The beauty part about having ham operators is we don't depend on cell towers. We don't depend on internet services. It's one radio to another radio with nothing in between. And as long as we have a battery and can operate our radios, we can generally relay a message in. And that's one of the primary reasons for having ham radios out there, is that when all else fails, the ham operators can still operate because we don't depend on any other infrastructure out there but us.
You know, I've gotten pretty spoiled myself with cell phone coverage until the day that I drove across North Georgia. You go from the northwest part there near Dahlonega. Actually, when you drive from the carpet place there along I-75, you drive across the mountains over to Dahlonega. I think we went 2 hours without a cell phone coverage, and I was thinking to myself, boy, I know a lot of amateur radio operators, and you know, they kind of bug me and get on me for not having a license. But if I live there's no doubt in my mind that I would do that. There's just a whole bunch of other complications in life right now that kind of preclude me from doing that, and I'm spoiled with cell phone coverage. But as we found out on April 27th, 2011, up in Northwest Alabama, up in the Hamilton area, when those cell towers went out and the generators ran out of fuel, there wasn't a whole lot of ways to get information in and out. Some of the cell towers were destroyed. So with that, when that happens, you know, what are you going to go to? And so I think it's kind of a natural affiliation with storm spotters and amateur radio, and I'm sure out in the Midwest back in the 60s, an entirely different story. Imagine it took a long time for phones to get out to some of those farmers out in the rural plains, that the amateur radio came along at the right time and helped them to communicate when they needed to, and potentially emergency situations. And that's kind of, I think, where the affiliation started with storm spotters and amateur radio. But of course now we can go down the interstate and have radar displayed and laptops running and everything on that. So I think it's an unfortunate natural affinity to go to what's easy, and fail to prepare for what's going to happen when those cell towers and those wideband, you know, those hot spots aren't going to work.
It is, and I experienced the same thing. You know, I've got at one point I had 2 cell phones, and plus my ham radio, and it was really nice because I had 2 different service providers, and usually I had coverage no matter where I was at. Um, However, my job takes me all over the state, and a lot of those places are rural communities that have industrial plants or whatever, and you're down in some places that you just don't have any kind of coverage. And all of a sudden, I reach over and there's the ham radio, and I can tune to whatever the local repeater is, and generally have a conversation. And I'm rarely alone. One of the other things that ham radio does is we support events, whether it's a bike ride, a 10K run, a 5K run, a marathon. We, as a matter of fact, in the Boston Marathon, we'll have nearly 200 operators stretched out along the entire Boston Marathon. We do one here, a couple here in Alabama. We support Make-A-Wish Foundation's Trailblaze Challenge that they do every year in the spring over in Talladega National Forest. And there is no self-coverage. We literally have to drive up to Cheehaw Mountain to get partway up the mountain to even get an intermittent cell phone signal. So they're out there doing a 28-mile hike up and down through there with all of nature. It starts at usually around 4 o'clock in the morning, ends about 8:30, 9 o'clock at night. And we will set operators up approximately every 4 miles down that entire path and set and operate radios for them and keep up with all of their people. There's multitude of other events that go on that we support. A lot of cases, we are the first response, the first communications out. We had the Cheehaw Challenge is a bike event they had this summer, and they had several hundred people involved in it. Had 2 severe accidents where we had to call in a helicopter to fly people out. And because we were far enough out in the woods and whatever, it was the amateur radios that relayed the message to people with cell phone up on the top of the hill that called in the first responders, and then they called in the helicopter again. We provide a lot of safety coverage in just charitable events as well as in storms or whatever. Again, very nice tool to have in the toolbox there for when you're traveling or when you're going through those less populated areas.
Well, that's great, and of course we've got the winter season coming up, and hopefully, the backdrop you've got there is not a forecaster of things to come. Let's keep the forecasting to us. I'll keep the radios to you. I kind of use that. I just have to know somebody that knows amateur radio. So I've got friends, I've got people. So
there you go.
And you all, you all ask me about the weather, so it's a fair turnaround, and it's a great relationship that we have with our amateur radio operators in Central Alabama. We count on you guys to get us the information we need to help protect lives and property, which is really what we're all about. And this is a great occasion to celebrate the heart and spirit of amateur radio and the volunteerism. What you mentioned volunteering for. I've several of the other members of Alert. They have a list of volunteers longer than their arms. The things that they support and do. They're just some real down to earth people that give and have a heart for really the same thing we do: protecting lives and property, mitigating that disaster situation, and just trying to help people get through a rough time. So we thank you and all the amateur radio operators out there. Skywarn Recognition Day 2021. We're proud to have you on board, and thank you for everything you do.
Well, John, I appreciate you having me. And again, I thank you and all the forecasters, both in Huntsville or Birmingham, Mobile, Tallahassee, that cover the state for us. And you're there all the time, through weekends, holidays, birthdays, whatever. You're always there, and your staff is always there. And again, I thank you for what you do for us.
Great. Thanks, Roger. And it is for everybody. We did not plan this orange shirt in today. We just got the same vibes over. We just wanted to look our best, and orange was the first thing that came to us in the closet, I guess, today. So that's going to wrap it up for this talk. Roger, thanks. If anybody has any questions, what's a good resource? Where can they go? Of course, weather.gov for us. What about for amateur radio?
ARRL, the Amateur Radio Relay League, has a national website up there, and you can go up to it. It's ARRL.org. And from there, the front page will allow you to select all the way down to your state and allow you to get an email to any of the state officers that are in place at that time when you go check. So again, you can go email any of us, and we will usually return your email within about 24 hours.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Roger. You have a great day, and appreciate you for all you do.
Thank you, John. Appreciate it.
All right, take care.
Bye-bye.